In the cold, windswept waters of the South Atlantic lies a remote archipelago. A place of stark beauty, and decades of unresolved geopolitical tension. To the United Kingdom, they are the Falkland Islands. To Argentina, they are Las Malvinas. Why does this small cluster of islands remain so fiercely contested? Is it a story of modern self-determination for the people who live here, or a lingering legacy of colonial injustice that must be righted? For generations, international diplomacy has walked a tightrope over these rocks. But beneath the surface, the embers of an old conflict still burn. Just when the world thought the dispute was settled in stone, recent tremors in global alliances have thrust the islands back onto the front page. A leaked internal memorandum from the United States has sent shockwaves through London and Buenos Aires, suddenly questioning the status quo. To understand how a remote archipelago could fracture modern superpowers, we must first look back to the very beginning of its recorded history. The year is 1690. English navigator Captain John Strong makes the first officially recorded landing on the islands, naming the sound after Viscount Falkland. Yet, the British did not immediately settle. In 1764, French explorer Louis-Antoine de Bougainville establishes the very first colony at Port Louis. Unaware of the French presence, the British arrived just 1 year later, in 1765, establishing their own settlement at Port Egmont. Spain, viewing the islands as part of its South American domain, objects fiercely. In 1767, France transfers its colony to the Spanish crown. The friction turns physical. In 1770, an armed Spanish fleet arrives at Port Egmont, forcibly evicting the British garrison from the islands. War is narrowly avoided. By 1771, a treaty restores Port Egmont to the British, but the foundational question of ultimate sovereignty is left unresolved. Facing economic pressures, Britain withdraws from Port Egmont in 1774. Crucially, they leave behind a lead plaque declaring the islands belong to King George. For the next few decades, Spain rules the islands unchallenged from Puerto Soledad, viewing the archipelago as a secure part of its empire. But revolutions soon tear through the Americas. In 1811, preoccupied by the Peninsular War at home, Spain withdraws its governor from the islands. As Spain's empire dissolves, the newly independent United Provinces of the River Plate, which would become Argentina, turn their eyes toward the South Atlantic. In 1820, Argentina formally claims sovereignty over the islands, arguing they legally inherited the territory from the departing Spanish crown. This legal principle, uti possidetis juris, forms the bedrock of the Argentine case. To Buenos Aires, the islands were naturally part of their new republic. Argentina establishes a penal colony and grants fishing rights. But these actions catch the attention of a resuscitated and powerful British Empire. The year is 1833. A British naval warship arrives at the islands, determined to reassert the sovereignty claim left on that lead plaque. No shots are fired. Faced with overwhelming British naval power, the Argentine military garrison yields and peacefully withdraws back to the mainland. To Britain, it was a peaceful re-establishment of their rightful property. To Argentina, it was an illegal act of colonial dispossession by force. For nearly 150 years, Britain develops the islands, while successive Argentine governments maintain a steady, formal protest against the occupation. By the late 20th century, diplomatic talks stagnate. In April 1982, Argentina's military junta launches a sudden invasion to reclaim the islands. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher responds with decisive force, dispatching a massive military task force across 8,000 miles of ocean. What follows is a fierce, 10-week undeclared war in the freezing South Atlantic, testing the limits of both nations' militaries. The conflict takes a heavy toll. By the time the Argentine forces surrender, 649 Argentines and 255 Britons are dead. The defeat triggers the collapse of the military dictatorship in Argentina, paving the way for a return to democratic governance. In Britain, the victory fosters a renewed national pride and solidifies an ironclad political commitment to protect the islands at all costs. Though the guns fell silent in 1982, the war left deep scars, ensuring the sovereignty issue became deeply emotional for both cultures. Today, the islands are a self-governing British overseas territory, home to a thriving economy built on fishing, agriculture, and tourism. Over 3,000 people live here now. For them, the debate isn't just about maps, it is about their identity and their home. In a landmark 2013 referendum, 99.8% of the islanders voted to remain a British territory, with only 3 voting against. London bases its entire modern legal argument on this democratic choice, citing the UN Charter's fundamental right to self-determination. But Argentina rejects this framework entirely. They argue that self-determination cannot be applied to an implanted population brought by a colonial power. The international community remains divided. The United Nations still explicitly lists the islands as a non-self-governing territory awaiting decolonization. In Argentina, recovering the islands remains a sacred goal, officially enshrined in the national constitution as an permanent and unrenounceable objective. For decades, the United States maintained a careful neutrality, recognizing British administration while acknowledging Argentina's persistent claim. But in early 2026, a shocking leak from the Pentagon shattered this long-standing diplomatic consensus, catching international observers off guard. Amidst intense geopolitical friction over the war against Iran, the memorandum suggested Washington re-evaluate its traditional support for European imperial possessions. The document hinted at using diplomatic support as leverage against allies who didn't fully align with recent American military actions. Argentina's leadership immediately seized the moment, boldly reaffirming that the islands are, and will always be sovereign Argentine territory. Downing Street moved swiftly to suppress the fire, firmly reiterating that British sovereignty is non-negotiable and fully backed by the islanders' votes. Though the State Department quickly moved to reaffirm its official neutrality, the memo revealed how fragile historical alliances can truly be. Centuries after the first ships arrived, the Falkland Islands remain an open wound in international law and global diplomacy. Can a historical grievance ever override the democratic will of a living population? Or does geographic proximity outweigh colonial history? As the winds continue to sweep across the South Atlantic, the destiny of these islands remains caught between the ghosts of the past and the uncertainty of the future.